I don't know about you guys, but I love me a good hypercoaster. There's just something so magical about a hypercoaster with a great first drop and a fun layout following it. In fact, my #1 coaster is a hypercoaster, Skyrush. I even have it over ElToro. Yeah, controversial opinions coming soon, don't attack me in the comments. I'm also a huge fan of Nitro. Controversial opinions on that already out. But there is one type of hypercoaster that seems to be constantly praised with almost every single one of its installations. The one, the only, the Intamin Mega Coaster. Okay, technically this isn't a hyper, or at least some of them aren't, but let's just pretend they are. If you think about the best mega coasters, you have some of the most beloved coasters of all time. You have Superman the Ride, which won Best Steel Coaster from the Golden Ticket Awards like 6 separate times. You have Condo, which opens next year, which many people will say would be the best steel coaster of all time. Then there's Expedition Geforce, which many people say is the best steel coaster of all time. Yeah, this is a pretty good model. But for some reason, we haven't seen these mega coasters, like, anywhere. I mean, you look at all the other coaster models around its quality and they're booming. The first RMC hybrid was back in 2011, but now it's almost double the amount of Intamin mega coasters, which started back in 1999. I mean, if you look at Intamin mega coasters, all the cards are in its favor. It's beloved by enthusiasts. It's intimidating to the GP. They're pretty reliable for Intamin. They're surprisingly cheap, but for some reason, they're just so scarce, not only in the US, but just around the world in general. It doesn't make any sense at first, but then you read between the lines. Then you take a closer look and you realize it makes perfect sense. The fact that a coaster this good on paper is so rare means there's gotta be something holding it back. It's not very common that we see coasters of this quality only selling 8 or 9, especially on this scale, and from a big name manufacturer like Intamin. And in this case, yeah, there's actually quite a few things scaring parks away from buying them again. So in this video, we're going to go over the many reasons why Intamin mega coasters are so rare. The #1 reason why we haven't seen a lot of Intamin mega coasters or hypercoasters, whatever you want to call them, is, well, it's just that. They're a class of hypercoasters. The B&M Hyper squashes out pretty much every other hyper out there. B&M has a monopoly over the hypercoaster market because when you think about it, who else makes hypercoasters to the success that B&M does? No one. No one even comes close. In fact, the Intamin Mega Coaster is the closest, and it's still a whopping 7 coasters shy of the B&M Hypers. The reason that manufacturers are getting so creative with their hypercoasters is because B&M has the traditional hypercoaster market on lockdown. S&S tried their hand at a hypercoaster with steel curtain, and it's weird. Look at this. What? Sometimes when I need a good chuckle, I just look at the steel curtain announcement videos. Like, look at this ride. It's so weird. Like, it's so weird. It's got all this epic music in the background, like, bow, bow. Look, it's a hypercoaster, but it's certainly not a traditional one, and not one that comes to mind when thinking about hypercoasters. And nothing against Steel Curtain, it looks like a great ride, but I'm just trying to say it's really weird, but that's what makes it unique. Mack Rides also does this with their hypercoasters. They put in inversions and rapid twists and turns and ejector hills because they need to. They need to distinguish themselves from the rest, and especially from B&M. The B&M Hyper is quite possibly the most successful model out there. Not only is it successful in the number sold, because like I said, 18's a lot for hypercoasters, but it's also successful with capacity, public reception, capacity, reliability, comfort. Oh, and the capacity on these things are incredible. Parks just love these hypers because aside from the layout, there are so many other great things about them. This has led to B&M having almost a full market control in these traditional hypercoasters. That's why Mack, Vekoma, S&S, and yes, some of the newer Intamin mega coasters are trying out different things in a hypercoaster, like inversions, like rapid transitions, like a twisted drop. But the thing is, most Intamin mega coasters are still too similar to hypercoasters to be an actual contender. Because even though Intamin mega coasters for the most part have better layouts, or at least better looking layouts than B&M Hypers, or at least better executed layouts than B&M Hypers, they still get passed up because of all of the pros about B&M Hypers. Pros like reliability, like opening on time, like safety. We'll get back to that parks really care about. Mack, Vekoma, and S&S Hypers are different enough from B&M Hypers that they're not even in the picture when speaking of a traditional hypercoaster, but Intamin mega coasters, no, those are just too similar. And even the unique ones like Mack and S&S Hypers struggled to sell. Vekoma hasn't even sold one yet. B&M dominates the hyper market, and Intamin mega coasters are just one casualty of this. Now, the one exception to this are RMC Hyper Hybrids, and this just kind of goes to prove my theory. RMC Hybrid Hybrids look nothing like B&M Hypers. Like, they couldn't be more different if I tried. They're super aggressive, have incredible pacing, with inversions scattered everywhere. There's not a single big camelback in sight. Heck, it's not even fully made out of steel. This uniqueness has led RMC Hyper Hybrids to already have 3 installations, which is already more than S&S and the same as Mack. But the B&M Hyper isn't the only reason Intamin mega coasters are so rare. No. there are a multitude of other reasons. Let's start out with Intamin's weird business strategy. Intamin targets smaller independent parks or chains that are trying to find a standout attraction for their parks. That's why the Blitz is so popular. It works at small parks as a standout attraction without taking up too much space, and if they play their cards right, it's not too expensive either. iSpeed was 15 million euros, and while that's not necessarily cheap, you have to remember what coaster we're talking about. iSpeed. Come on, it's iSpeed. The Intamin Mega Coaster also appeals to this market. They're great, intimidating headlining attractions that's got pretty good capacity for these size parks, but most importantly, they're not super expensive. I mean, they are expensive, it's still a hypercoaster we're talking about, but it's not even close to the cost of a B&M Hyper. The problem is, Intamin is almost cannibalizing their own sales of the mega coasters with their Blitz coasters, because all the qualities that make a mega coaster great for these medium-sized independent parks are also in the Blitz, and the Blitz has a lot of other pros to this. The Blitz coasters are just a lot more versatile, and when I say versatile, I mean two things. First of all, they have an adjustable intensity. The mega coasters are kind of at a fixed intensity. The only one that really stands out among the rest is Conda because of those RMC elements, but other than that, intensity-wise, they're all pretty similar. Heavy on the negative Gs, some quickish transitions, but it's mostly just airtime, no positive Gs or laterals or stuff. The Blitz coasters are pretty adjustable in this sense. On one hand, you could have an absolute powerhouse coaster like Maverick or Taiga, or you could have a coaster that lets you take in your surroundings more like Cheetah Hunt or Terran. The other thing is these Blitz coasters are pretty flexible with where they can go. You can pretty much put these anywhere. If you want a long sprawling layout like Steel Dolphin or Cheetah Hunt, you can do that with a Blitz. If you want a super tight compact coaster with rapid transitions that's not too tall, you can do that with a Blitz like Maverick. If you want a coaster that can literally be built on the side of a frickin' mountain like Taiga or Nefeskessen, you can do that with a Blitz. With a mega coaster, that's not really the case. Yeah, you have Thunder Dolphin, which is actually insane, built right on top of a building, but other than that, it's just flat land, baby. And unfortunately, a lot of these small parks and chains just don't have flat land to burn. 3 to 9 of the mega coasters are Six Flags coasters at otherwise pretty lackluster parks with a lot of land. I mean, Wicked Cyclone is good, but really what else does Six Flags New England have? But Six Flags doesn't work with Intamin anymore, so that possibility for other smaller parks is thrown out the window. I have a whole video on why Intamin isn't going to come back to the US, so if you want to check that out, then I'll put it in the card or something. I don't know, it shouldn't be very hard to find. But I mean, if you really think about it, there aren't a whole lot of parks left that Intamin is trying to appeal to that could realistically get one of these Intamin mega coasters, because it's all been eaten up by the Blitz or B&M Hyper. Holiday World? No, because they already have the Voyage, which is very hyper-like, and they usually just like to focus on wooden coasters. Their last one was a steel coaster, so I'm sure their next one is going to be a wooden coaster. Liseberg? Well, they already have an intimidating coaster with Valkyria, plus their hillside setting would make it hard for any hypercoaster. I mean, everywhere else just has a Blitz or a B&M Hyper, or is one of those cases like Holiday World or Liseberg that an Intamin mega coaster doesn't make sense at. Look at all these parks that have a Blitz or a B&M Hyper that an Intamin mega coaster would have been perfect at. PortAventura, Phantasialand, Europa Park, Linnamaki, SeaWorld Orlando. BGW literally just did both. There just isn't the market for this anymore because we just run out of parks. And that might also be the reason we've seen a decline in B&M Hyper sales. Yes, the king of hypercoasters is also on its last legs, only selling 3 in the 2010s, which is still one more than Intamin did, but it's definitely slowed down, especially with the introduction of their Giga coasters. The last reason is safety. While yes, we know these coasters are incredibly safe, they don't exactly have the best track record. Did you know Expedition Geforce had an accident? On April 28th in 2010, the wheels on the 4th car derailed, which hung those trains literally off the track after the first drop. While it's been debated whether this is Intamin's fault or poor maintenance on Holiday Park's side, it still gives the model bad juju. I mean, this is arguably the best and most iconic Intamin mega coaster. It was even quoted as being some of Intamin's finest work, and it had an accident. And then you have the infamous accident on Ride of Steel where a veteran was freaking ejected from the ride. Now yes, this wasn't Intamin's fault, like at all, but again, it still leaves a bad taste in Park's mouth with this model. Then there's the accident in Superman the Ride, which led to these horrible brick restraints. An employee also died after being struck by a train while trying to retrieve a phone on Hyperion's track. And while this isn't Intamin's fault, like not even in the slightest, like 0%, it's just getting a little ridiculous at this point. Like that means practically half of the coasters of the Intamin mega coaster model has had an accident of some sort. Like even if it wasn't Intamin's fault at all for any of them, which I mean 2 of them, the argument could be made that it would still scare parks away. And also, Intamin just doesn't have the cleanest track record. Shoot the Rapids, Accelerator, Top Thrill Dragster, Green Lantern, and there's even that Stormrunner lawsuit. These are all rides that have had an incident of some degree. While some of these weren't Intamin's fault, especially that fake Stormrunner thing, it still leaves a bad taste in Park's mouth when speaking of Intamin. And then you have the other reasons Intamin just doesn't build that many coasters to begin with. Reliability, price, bad publicity, history. While these things might not apply to all the mega coasters, these are still things you have to take into account when looking at Intamin as an option. Like I said, I have a video about Intamin not coming back to the US, so look for it somewhere. I don't know, it's somewhere. But yeah, that's why this beloved model isn't being built that much. Anyways, that's gonna about wrap up this video. We're nearing 3,000 subscribers, so if you aren't subscribed, then it would mean the world to me if you could hit that sub button and give the video a thumbs up. But then again, if you made it this far, you should subscribe anyways, or you're already subscribed. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.